the job market is shifting this fast, why spend so much money for a degree that might not guarantee an actual job or stability?
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Higher Ed Pulse, your no-fluff guide to artificial intelligence in higher ed. I'm Mallory Willsea, bringing nearly 20 years of edtech and marketing expertise straight to your earbuds. Higher ed leaders are expected to master AI overnight, but let's be real, no one has time to sift through every headline, hot take, or research report. That's why every Monday, I'll break down what actually matters. Fast, clear, and to the point. Want to sound like the smartest person in the room at your next team meeting? You're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Higher Ed Pulse. On today's episode, 68% of Americans say higher ed is on the wrong track. 77% call it unaffordable, and more than a third say we're not teaching skills that matter for today's workforce. With public confidence hitting new lows, the fight for higher ed's value has never been sharper. And with me today is Mary Keister, principal and owner of Mary Keister Consulting. Mary has spent more than a decade helping colleges and universities navigate reputation-defining moments and communicate with clarity when confidence is on the line. She's advised on strategic communications for liberal arts colleges, R1 universities, and national nonprofits, elevating presidential voices, managing crises, and advancing institutional priorities. A former comms leader at Kenyon College and alum of the Washington Post, Mary now advises institutions nationwide on the issues that matter most: trust, value, and public perception. Mary, I can't think of a better guest to have with this topic on the Pulse. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Mallory. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation today.
I am too. And it's so interesting to me that here we are about to embark on a conversation about the value of higher education. And you just told me right before we started recording that you are taking your first non-degree course since your undergrad days. So awesome. Can you tell me more about this?
Yes, I'm very lucky because my husband is a faculty member at a university where he gets tuition remission benefits. And
Nice.
so I, for the first time, am taking advantage of that. I had some time in my schedule this semester, found a course that sounded really interesting to me. That's not something I would have studied as part of my normal undergraduate degree program. But it's been so fascinating to kind of like be back on that other side of higher ed as a student now and go through all of that process and register for class online for the first time too. I had never done that before.
I bet you're uncovering all these little friction points, right? That like at some point you're like, and this is why students are frustrated.
Yeah, learning a lot about Canvas as a platform.
Oh,
Maybe more than I ever wanted to know.
So what is the class? I'm dying to know.
It's a class about museums, and so it's been really interesting. It's about like the history of museums, the theory, the purposes of museums, how they contribute to the public good and societal good. So it's a lot of conversations, and I leave every class just thinking more and more about how it relates to my own work in higher ed with strategic communication. So a lot of strings that I'm tying up there.
That's awesome. Congrats on like kind of taking the leap to do something differently. I know you have some young kids and so finding the time to prioritize for yourself, I just really commend you on that. And so what an interesting switch into our topic today. When your confidence in education and taking classes is rising, the public's is going in the opposite direction. Gallup reports that back in 2010, 75% of Americans said college was very important. But a new article just published last week indicates that today, only 35% agree. In the past 15 years, trust in higher ed as an institution has dropped from nearly 60% to the mid-30s. Lumina's data sharpens the critique. 68% of adults believe higher ed is on the wrong track, and 77% call it unaffordable, and nearly 40% say we're not teaching relevant skills for today's workforce. Affordability plus workforce relevance equals ROI, and families increasingly don't believe the math is working. But maybe most alarming, Mary, 36% of current students say their own trust in higher ed has declined while enrolled. So these are our insiders, and they're losing faith while they're inside the system. That means disengagement, potentially transfers and attrition. Like that's what is going to follow. So students and their families, right? They're sharp. They're paying attention and they're seeing AI automate entry-level roles and compress wages, which makes ROI feel even shakier. If the job market is shifting this fast, why spend so much money for a degree that might not guarantee an actual job or stability? Mary, we've got some really big questions to tackle today. And listeners, you can find the links to the articles where I've rattled off all these stats. You can find them down in the show notes, of course. So Mary, let's just get into it. Public trust has clearly been in decline for about 15 years, if not longer. Gallup is saying 35% of Americans, only 35% of Americans see college as very important. You layer in all that other data I just mentioned. When you look at these articles and their trend lines all together, what do you think is the truest diagnosis of this moment? And maybe where leaders on campus is getting it wrong?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I feel like this question of confidence in higher education has been part of the discourse, certainly since I've started in higher education more than a decade ago. And there's a real questioning of the value of higher education that's permeating the decisions that people make. So the New York Times ran an article that I found really interesting this summer that covered how parents are increasingly questioning the value of 529 plans for their children as vehicles for investing in their future. And I've certainly had that too in conversations with just people in my community. We talk about what we're doing for college for our kids. We live in a college town. It's a very normal topic of conversation. But even that question of, are you opening a 529 plan? What are you doing? Is that going to sink a lot of money into something where it might not pay off in 20 years? So this value question, I feel like it's only going to get more important in future years as new federal regulations cap how much students and their families can borrow for their education as well. So it's a very real issue, and it's one that demands all of our attention. But also, when I say all of our attention, I mean truly all of our attention. One of the great strengths, I feel, of the American higher education system is that we have this incredible diversity of types of institution. And I really think we could do a much better job of elevating that in the public eye. It's hard when there is so much attention paid to one slice of American higher education. And I'm not just talking about even the Ivies that are in the news these days so much. It's also about, what institutions are featured in popular media. What are students seeing as that image of college? When you have a movie about college, is it featuring a community college or parents taking online courses after work? Or is it more about, those wild frat parties and that residential 4-year school with the beautiful quad? So it's also that question of, the institutions that I would argue are the most under-recognized, at least by our society, are also the ones that with the most limited resources with which to tell the story about how they are transforming lives. And they are doing an incredible job of advancing economic mobility. So when I see polls like Gallup and Lumina, and I think there was one done by Pew recently as well, one of the first questions that tends to cross my mind is, what do we mean by higher ed? And I haven't really dug too deep in the data, but, I'd be curious if they could parse out, is higher ed referring to community college? Is it referring to, your regional public? I don't think people recognize that full, true diversity of higher education. I think, they might just be seeing headlines about annual tuition crossing $100,000 per year, which sticker price versus net price is a whole nother soapbox I could get on, so I won't do that now. But are they seeing headlines like that and then automatically developing a mistrust or even an animus towards all higher education institutions?
It's almost like we need, a Got Milk campaign for higher ed.
Yes. And I've heard a lot of college presidents talk about how we need that as well. And yet it just hasn't really come together in that way. And I hope that this is a moment where we can really recognize that we need to do something. But, I just think we have a lot of work to do as well to just parse out what we mean by that, trust in higher education, but also collectively educate the public on all of the options that are out there and all of the success of higher education at all of these different types of institutions. They all have slightly different missions, but, they all contribute to our overall well-being. And I think that's also where leaders really struggle is there's that pervasive feeling that, yes, higher ed has issues. There was a recent Pulse Point survey of presidents that ACA just released that showed that 77% of presidents that were surveyed are extremely or moderately concerned about the public perception of the value of college. But I think there's also a sense among those presidents that, well, it's not my own institution, these problems are elsewhere. So, I think there's just been historically a focus on oh, well, look over there. This isn't with me. This is just everybody else has this issue. When I think about leaders misdiagnosing this issue as well, I think there's also been historically a focus on communicating primarily with revenue generating audiences. So prospective students, prospective donors. But as the past year has shown, you can't neglect relationships with lawmakers, with local community leaders, with leaders in the private sector. And so when we're talking about developing trust in higher education, and I know we're talking primarily about families and students today, but it's not just about trust for current students and their families. It's not even trust for students who are in high school now. It's thinking about, well, what's the world that we are want to live in 20 years from now? Who are the students who aren't born yet? And how can we develop broader societal trust to help uplift those students?
In your role, how are you working with your clients to get them to communicate with those other groups? Because I think you're right. Even the core of our communication mediums, like the website and the mailers that many institutions do, right? They are prioritizing that revenue generating person, whether it's a prospective student, an alum, donor, et cetera. So all these systems aren't really built best for communicating with some of those other populations. And there might not even be a comms plan in place. This could literally be starting from scratch for someone who's listening to this podcast.
Yes. And I think we've seen that this past year with the increase of colleges and universities hiring lobbyists, for example. But yeah, it is a little bit of how do you build that operational capacity to do this work? Do you need to hire someone who specializes in government relations? Does your community relations live with someone, or has it been pushed to the side? And what does community relations even mean? Does that mean you just send out listings of your concerts to the local newspaper? Or are you truly engaging with people in your community to not only solve issues as they arise, but also prevent them from happening in the first place? Are you talking with people truly in good times, not just bad? And so I think there is that kind of organizational capacity piece of this as well that colleges really need to reckon with, especially as, budgets are shrinking. It's not an easy fix. And yet thinking about where you need to invest your resources, I would argue, don't ignore that population, even if they're not immediately paying off.
Yeah, that's a longer term game, but an important one. Interesting. That was really interesting. You're giving me a lot to think about here, Mary, and I'm sure listeners as well. So, I joked about the, higher ed needs a got milk campaign, but let's be real. We know that a slogan isn't going to fix all of our problems. But I do think that there's an instinct, right? Especially the listeners of this podcast are mostly Marcom or in some level of communication and engagement role, right? So I think maybe a lot of us, our instinct is spin it with messaging, go to communications first, right? But I feel like you as a PR pro know more than most that families are paying more attention to the outcomes and the affordability information than they are our cool tagline or our slogan. So where is this line around communication versus operational change? And obviously they're both important, but as you're advising a president, say, right, how are you helping them sequence those two things so you're not winding up in a space where you are overpromising and under-delivering?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And, I would first advise them to tell the truth. Always. Everybody should just tell the truth. Don't spin things. If you have good outcomes, tell those stories. But if you are really working on how to help your students pay back their loans, how to help your students obtain jobs after graduation, be open about that too, because people are smart. There's also a lot of data out there that people can get about your institution. So, when I think about this question, though, I'd also ask, are colleges truly under-delivering on preparing students for the workforce, or is this more of an issue of public perception? And I don't necessarily have the answer to that, but I do think it's important to be clear about the issues that we're trying to address. But in general, you're right. Communications alone cannot solve issues. And I get so frustrated when senior leaders diagnose an issue and they say, well, if only our communications were better. And it's you can have the greatest communications in the world, but if your operations and more importantly, if your leadership is not there, then it's congratulations, you've just built a house of cards. So when I advise senior leaders, I generally say, one, don't overpromise on things outside your control. Presidents of colleges and universities do not control the economy, right? You can't control the state of the job market. So don't promise your graduates that you can get them jobs. You can promise them support. and help people understand what you do control. Help them understand, could you offer more flexibility in terms of transcript holds if students owe fees, or, what can you do to improve economic mobility for your students? I would say be transparent as well. Talk about how much debt your graduates hold and what you're doing to reduce that burden. Like, be honest with families about what it takes to pay for your tuition, because you don't want to make promises when they're coming in and then, 2 years later, they're saying, what the heck happened? You lied to us. I really respect what Bethel University and St. Paul recently announced they're doing, and I read about that recently in Inside Higher Ed, where they're basically committing to graduates that if graduates don't receive a job offer or an acceptance to graduate school within 6 months of graduating, the university will offer them either a tuition-free spot in their own graduate courses or even a staff position. And that's a really clear promise, and I hope they can deliver on that. But I also think, above all, when I think about what senior leaders could do more of, it really is listening. And I think that's hard for senior leaders because they have scholarly authority and they like to fix things. But also just taking that time to actually understand, what are you hearing from students and families? Also, what are you hearing from alumni? Are you just sending out alumni appeals to ask them for money? Or are you actively checking in with them on their careers? Are you seeking their stories? Are you helping them on their career journeys? So I just think it's all of that. It has to be not just telling your story, but also just checking in with your own community and seeing what they need and then figuring out how you can help from there.
Yeah. When I posted a little teaser on LinkedIn around this topic recently, because I knew we were going to be recording about this, and I just wanted to see what people were going to start to say. And the Bethel example came up there. Tim Hammer, their AVP for Marcom, I thought made a really great point, and I'm going to read out what his comment was. He said, yes, we need to make the case, but I think we also need to take a hard look at the climbing costs, potential skills misalignment, and AI advancements and respond. This week, we announced the Bethel Career Commitment, bethel.edu/more. We didn't ditch our gen eds or only focus on professional degrees or remove our liberal arts at the core. Why? Because that wasn't what families were asking. They were asking if college is worth it. And I was like, yes, Tim. Thank you for reminding us, right? Families, he's paying attention to his audience. He's hearing what his audience is asking. He's seeing what the public is asking, right? Is it worth it? And they're directly answering that question with their more campaign. It's awesome. I'll put a link, folks, in the show notes, but it's really it's bethel.edu/more, and everyone should take a look at it. So Mary, so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So along all of these lines, let's say you had a magic wand and a client hired you and you could rewrite the value story for their campus. What are the 3 proof points that you would put front and center to those families? And now it's a little unfair. I mean, I am asking you this question without, the deep understanding of the audience of this fictional institution. But in general, what are 3 proof points that you think tend to make sense to shine a light on?
Oh my gosh. Well, yes, it does depend. There's all sorts of data out there that really shows the economic value of a college degree, that, you'll have higher lifetime earnings, which in turn builds lifetime wealth. You can pass that down to your kids. Data also show that people with college degrees, they tend to live longer. They tend to be more civically engaged. And I would classify all of these as, good outcomes. I hope families would agree. So in a sense, higher ed does offer that stability in a world where, at least to me, it feels like stability is really lacking these days. But I think it's hard to answer that question because for families who are making decisions about colleges, there's maybe a couple of different groups of families. And I'm not an enrollment marketing expert, so I'm approaching this from more of a strategic communications lens. But, when I'm thinking about proof points, I imagine you'll have some families and students who are really set on the idea of going to college. It's just a matter of which type of institution, which program, and where they can get the most personal, ROI on their degree. And then you'll have some families and students who are in a different group who see that huge upfront investment in terms of, not just money, but also time. And it can be really hard to see how a college degree would pay off, especially if you're thinking more about that opportunity cost of sacrificing what could have been 2 to 4 to 6 years of working full time. And so I think for those families, it has to be a different conversation. And we need to not be dismissive of those very real concerns, but also talk about, one, why that investment of time and money now is so important, But also, too, talk about ways to reduce that burden. So maybe that means helping students balance their schedules with part-time work so they're not missing out on that earnings opportunity. Or maybe it's just being extra clear about institutional aid. Maybe it's connecting them with alumni who had those same concerns when they were entering that college and they were trying to make their own decisions about whether to matriculate. And so again, like these value proof points, they might be just different depending on the campus and the students and the families. But something else that I turn over a lot in my mind is I feel like students do see the value in college, maybe more so than adults. There was a poll that AP conducted earlier this summer that showed that. And it also showed that girls in particular view college as more important for achieving their life goals, more so than boys viewed it. And so with that growing gender gap, I also think that, there might be a need here for colleges to perhaps tailor their messaging. But, something I hear a lot, and especially alumni messaging is, like you're joining this family of alumni, like you're part of this university community forever. But then it's sort of like, well, what does that actually mean? Like, are you just getting an invitation back to homecoming, or are you truly getting a lifetime of support? And so I think that could also be a proof point that campuses could offer is, here's what we actually offer for our alumni. Here's how we support them. Here's how they're engaged with us. I feel like that alumni engagement piece is so important. I don't know, Mallory, bottom line is like jobs change, industries change, careers change, but that value of a degree to an individual, like that has remained important. I feel like regardless of institution, regardless of time, like there's always been that value in a degree. Maybe it's fluctuated in value, but it has been there. So even if things are in turmoil now, we need to just encourage families to really see that value in the long term, but then also help them understand how we are working to minimize that short-term investment that they need to make.
As I've been listening to you, like about 50 different thoughts have all pushed into my brain at the same time. I'm going to try and make sense of them. I think that you're spot on. And I just recently saw a headline from, I don't know if it was one of the leaders at OpenAI or Claude or, it was one of those companies that basically said the most valuable skill set that somebody can have right now is learning how to learn. And then that takes me to a liberal arts education, which listeners know I champion all day, every day, because with the liberal arts education, you are learning how to learn and how to think, not what to think. And I remember when I was standing as an admission counselor at my alma mater, a liberal arts college, and I was talking to, open house students and families and reminded them that, and I think the same message is true today. The job that you're going to eventually have probably doesn't exist right now. And so the benefit of education is learning how to learn so that you can prepare yourself for whatever that job happens to be, because the world changes quickly, because AI, just look at everything that's happened over the last few years, and you can argue that AI is going to wind up replacing maybe more jobs than it creates, for sure. But still, the skill set of learning how to learn, I think, is so wildly important. And so I just wanted to co-sign all the stuff you said around that. It made me think of that. The other thing that I wanted to highlight that you mentioned is, what is the value of the institution to the alum? And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there, actually, because as we were also commenting on earlier, what is the narrative out in the world, right? What do you see portrayed in the headlines, in the movies, and different things? Well, it's probably college alum who are making those, right? Like a lot of those people went to college, so they're alum of a college, and they're probably thinking about how their college treats them, right? And as someone who has 2 degrees, I can tell you I've got one institution that I feel incredibly valued as an alum from, and one that I'm like, I think you forget about me because I have to give you my class here every time I fill out a freaking form. And shouldn't you know that by now? I graduated many years ago. Whereas the other one, literally is offering ongoing learning, whether that's in their town or locally to me or online. It's just incredible what Northwestern does, because I'll give them their flowers, is incredible what Northwestern does to make alum feel valued and to make me feel like I am staying on top of my skills as a marketing professional who got a marketing degree from their institution. So kudos to them. Mary, we have, 25 minutes has just flown so fast, and you have shared so much great information. I want to go back to one of the stats that I actually think alarmed me the most 36% of current students say their own trust in higher ed has declined while enrolled on their campus. Yikes. Like, when your current students stop believing, like, that's a massive problem. So from your, perch as a PR professional, like, what would you do with a client having this issue? Like, how do you advise them to rebuild trust with the students that are already on their campus, and turn them back into like ambassadors for the institution, not detractors?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I would say colleges and universities could invest more in internal communications. I think we saw a big investment in that after COVID. But internal communications, it goes so far beyond just emails and newsletters. It's also like, how do you show up as people on campus, right? Like, if you're not showing up and listening to students, then you're just blasting things out into the world. And it's sort of like, how are they being received? You don't know. So just listen to students and ask them what they think, what they need. I think students also, they don't necessarily see what's working at a college or university, and they don't always need to. Like, there's a lot going on in a college or university that, like, they just don't need to worry about. They need to focus on their studies. But they do see things that are broken. So inviting them into that process of like how you're going to fix something is really important. And that can be everything from, like, how do they pay for their courses to can they park on campus? Parking is so important on a college campus. So just like make sure your systems actually work if you say that they will. I think it's also just talking about when you say that things are important for students, don't just say that they're important, but help them figure out how to obtain them. So talking about, if internships are important. Well, if they are so important, then what opportunities are you offering on your own campus for internships? Thinking about, if students need to go to career services and utilize the career services office because it's so important for their future success. Well, what are the hours of that office? Can students actually go to that office? Or are they running into issues because, they have classes during the day and then they have, athletics practice and it's not open when they need it to be open. So just really pay attention to all those pain points. But I get so excited when college and university presidents tell me about all the things that they're doing to like leave their desk during the day and actually just go out on campus and like be in community with students when they talk about, eating in the dining hall or like going to athletics practices and just showing up and observing and like being there for students. I think that's what college and university leaders could be doing more of. And yes, it's a time crunch, but invest that time in just showing up and listening and being a human.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we spend our time on the things that we want to spend our time on, right? And so we can find the 10 minutes in the day to walk around the campus if we decide that that is the most important thing we can do that day.
Yeah. Well, I think there's something else that I get frustrated about occasionally, and this tends to happen when April and May roll around, and senior leaders get a little burned out, and they start to view students who are being very vocal or activist as kind of like obstacles, and they think, well, if only we can get through May, and then all the students will be gone for the summer, or the problematic students will graduate. And it's sort of like, well, no, like students turn into alumni, and so if you have a bad experience as a student, or you're not paid attention to as a student, then like that's going to stick with you for the next 40 to 50 years when you're an alum. So students, like, they're not problems to be ignored. Like, if a student is losing trust in your institution, that has to be a top priority.
Yeah. So listeners, how are we going to start to make the case for college when families are seeing costs climb, AI advancing, skills misalign? Mary and I have just broken this down to the best of our abilities for the last 25 minutes or so, but we are so interested to hear what you have to say, what actions you might be taking, like Bethel University and their campaign. Find Mary and me on LinkedIn. We would love to continue the conversation there. And do not forget, friends, the next AI Engage Summit is right around the corner in October. I'll drop a link to where you can see the agenda and register for that event in the show notes. A lot of gold in our show notes today, so run, don't walk, and grab all those links. Mary, any parting thoughts on this topic before we wrap up?
I think don't lose sight of your purpose and why you're in higher education. It can feel tough sometimes, but we're all here for a reason.
It's beautiful. We're going to end it on that, friends. We'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Pulse. The show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.